How's it going, guys? There's an interesting fight coming up in the super middleweight division, and it's between WBA champion Tyron Zeuge, and he's going to be defending his title against Isaac Ekpo. Now, Isaac Ekpo is the mandatory challenger, and how this fight came about was Tyron Zeuge was originally set to fight Paul Smith. I actually had a prediction video up on my channel for that fight. However, the WBA, a few days after the fight got signed, they came out and they rejected the fight, and they said, no, Tyron Zeuge has to fight our mandatory challenger Isaac Ekpo before he has an optional defense. So they refused the fight. Also, they claimed because Paul Smith isn't ranked in their top 10 or the top 10 of any of the sanctioning bodies, in fact, that he wasn't entitled to a title shot. So yeah, they pulled the fight. I believe the Sauerlands tried to appeal it and tried to get the optional defense for Zeuge. However, Ekpo and his people weren't having it, so this fight's going ahead. It's going to be March 25th in Germany, and I think this is a much better fight than the Smith fight, because the Smith fight, although it wasn't a terrible fight, I understand why people were against it, because Paul Smith really didn't deserve a title shot. I mean, the guy hasn't really beaten anybody who's a legitimate contender. His only wins in his career have been against journeymen, and every time he has stepped up to fight somebody who's even close to being a contender, he's either lost or he's looked bad. So, Paul Smith, to me, he's not a world-class fighter, okay? He's not a guy that should be getting world title shots. He's been given, I believe, 3 world title shots already, and he's failed each time. And even when he got those shots, he wasn't in a ranked position to get those shots. So yeah, he's been very lucky with being given world title shots, and I understand why the WBA decided to pull the fight, and I'm not mad about it, because we've gotten a better fight now. Nobody seems to be talking about this one, because Isaac Ekpo is a fighter who most people haven't heard of. He's not a very well-known fighter outside of Africa, but I know who he is because I've watched him several times. I remember watching him a few years ago when he fought Robert Stieglitz, and Robert Stieglitz was the WBO champion at the time at super middleweight, and he fought Isaac Ekpo, and the fight was fairly competitive. Although Stieglitz won the fight, and he won the fight clearly, Ekpo, he didn't come to lay down. He came to fight, and he actually did give Stieglitz several problems in the ring, and he looks like a fairly decent fighter to me. He's tall, he's rangy, he's in very good shape. He's one of these fighters who's always in shape. He's got a decent jab. He's got fairly decent defense. He's a little bit stiff, and he's not really the most mobile fighter I've seen, but he's fundamentally sound. He's tough. He's durable. He's he's just one of these guys who, if you're gonna fight him, you're gonna get a long, difficult workout at the very least. Put it that way. So I think it's a decent first title defense for Zeuge. Zeuge is a very inexperienced champion. Like I said, he won the title in his last fight against Di Carolus by a 12th round knockout, and that was in a rematch because their first fight was a draw. And I felt that the encouraging signs into that rematch was that Zeuge showed tremendous improvement in terms of his stamina, because in the first fight he got tired by the mid stages. Even though he was having the better of most of the exchanges early on, he ended up getting tired, and the more experienced champion, Di Carolus, outworked him and outfought him in the later rounds, and that was really the difference in the fight. The fight ended up being a draw. So in the rematch, clearly Tyron Zeuge went back to the drawing board and realised that he had to prepare for a hard 12-rounder, which he'd never really fought before fighting that fight. So yeah, he improved his stamina. He was able to maintain his energy throughout the fight, and he rallied in the 12th round and got the stoppage, and he was winning the fight prior to that too. So very, very impressive improvements, I would say, from Zeuge in the second fight. And but yeah, Ekpo to me is a little bit, he's a little bit more fundamentally solid than Di Carolus. I mean, it's debatable who was better, because Di Carolus had a lot of losses, but his losses were against decent competition. People like Arthur Abraham, for example, and Lalenga Mock. These are guys that are very dangerous fighters, so losing to them, there's really no shame in it. But, he'd certainly fought the better competition than Ekpo, but Ekpo has only, he's looked, just to me, he looks more fundamentally solid. He's got a better guard and, a good jab, and, he's just a solid fighter and a solid all-round contender. And I think that this is a good fight. Now, how do I think the fight's going to go? I don't think it's going to be quite as explosive as the Di Carolus fights were. I mean, like I said, Di Carolus is a little bit more of a fighter, a guy that lets his hands go and stuff, whereas Ekpo to me is more of a conventional boxer who's a little bit upright. So I think that the fight's going to be a tactful fight. I think that Epco's going to try and stay on the outside and try and bring the fight to the later rounds and just box his way out. I think he's going to be looking for a decision. And I think that Zeuge, being the younger, less experienced fighter, being the guy who's a little bit hot-headed at this stage, I can see him being the aggressor in the fight. Now, the fight's taking place in Germany. It's going to be in Zeuge's hometown. I don't know how significant that's going to be. I really don't think that is significant. I mean, I know there's a bad reputation out there in terms of decisions in Germany, but I honestly think that that's a false reputation, and I've been planning to make a video on that for a while. I've just never got round to it. I really don't know how to articulate that video, but there's a lot of examples that I want to use and a lot of stuff I want to talk about in regards to boxing politics and why I don't think that the reputation that Germany has should be, I don't really think it's justified, put it that way, but that's a whole different topic. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be any issue with scoring here. I think that it's going to be one of those fights. It's going to be close early on because of the inexperience of Zeuge, and because I think that Ekpo is a decent conventional boxer. It's going to be one of those fights. It's going to be cagey. It's going to be competitive. But honestly, I see the younger guy in Zeuge, the younger and fresher and fitter fighter. I see him pulling off the victory, and I think it's most likely going to be either a late stoppage or a comfortable decision. That's how I see this one going. It's an interesting fight, don't get me wrong. I mean, look, at this stage of Zeuge's career, we really haven't seen him at his best. We really don't know how good he is. I mean, he showed his vulnerabilities and his flaws in the first Di Carolus fight, but then improved in the rematch. But again, Di Carolus is a completely different style of fighter to Ekpo. I mean, Ekpo is certainly a much better opponent than anybody else Zeuge has fought prior to Di Carolus. So, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting fight. Now, let's say if Zeuge wins this fight, there's really big fights for him in the future. I mean, they'll probably still try and go ahead with the Smith fight at some point. I think, since Sauerland and Eddie Hearn and all their people seem to really want that fight to take place for some reason, I think that fight is likely going to happen if Zeuge wins this fight. Obviously, I think they'll probably try and maybe bribe the WBA, or that maybe they'll get Smith to fight a couple more journeymen and maybe boost him up the rankings or something. I don't know, but I think that fight is likely going to happen at some point. And after that, look, there's very big fights for Zeuge. I mean, you've got George Groves is suspected to be fighting Fedor Chudinov for the Super WBA title, so perhaps the WBA will mandate that fight. Maybe Zeuge will have to fight the winner, and that'll be interesting because, Groves, he's a guy who seems to have retooled his game recently, and he seems to be on a good comeback. I mean, ever since being with Shane McGuigan, seems to be getting some of that old swagger back, some of that old sharpness and fluidity that he had. I mean, when he was with Adam Booth, because when he left Adam Booth, he just became such a flawed fighter, man. I mean, losing Adam Booth from his corner was one of the worst things that happened to Groves, and I'll maybe make a video about that too, but yeah, that's a separate topic. But the reason I'm bringing him up is because there's a very good possibility that Zeuge and Groves could meet in the future, not only because of the WBA, but also because both guys are with Sauerland. So, the Sauerlands, they've had in-house fights before, and I'm sure that they would be looking at Groves and Zeuge, and perhaps that's a fight that they that they'd be thinking about for the future. I don't know. And also Arthur Abraham, who's he's fighting what's his name? The big tall guy. I forgot his name. The big tall German guy. Krasniqi, Robin Krasniqi, yeah, the guy that fought Jürgen Bremer and Cleverly, that guy. He's fighting Arthur Abraham next. I believe that's an eliminator for the WBO or something like that. However, I really don't think that Sauerland want to put Arthur Abraham back in with Ramirez. I mean, that would be just completely pointless. I mean, Ramirez battered him the first time, and Abraham's just too old to retool his game and win the rematch. It just ain't going to happen. So I really don't think that an Abraham, even though Abraham's going for a WBO eliminator, I don't think that an Abraham Ramirez rematch is really on the cards. I think that Abraham versus Zeuge is a much more likely fight, and that's why I'm bringing him up. I would like to see that fight because that could be kind of a passing of the torch fight for Sauerland and their team. They might put Abraham in the ring with Zeuge. They could have a big fight in Berlin, and maybe it could be the old master passing on the torch to their new young unbeaten fighter. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But this fight, I'm picking Zeuge to win either by a late stoppage or a clear decision. But it's an interesting fight. I'll look forward to seeing it. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.